to Book Club with Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. If you're just finding us online, we are the imperfect homeschool mom podcast for homeschoolers. There's nothing shiny and perfectionist about our podcast. If things have gone to hell in a handbasket, we're just going to let you know. We're not going to bother hiding it. My name is Megan, and my fabulous co-host is
Amanda. Hi.
Welcome, welcome. So our current book that we are discussing is Teach Your Own by John Holt and Pat Farenga. And Amanda, you mentioned that you've got a bit of whiplash going on. We are discussing chapters 9 and 10. What is causing your whiplash?
It's like the whole thing, it's mental and emotional whiplash, right? Like last week was that insanity about like disabilities don't exist. And then now chapter 9 is children and work. And I'm reading his stuff and I feel like every other paragraph contradicts itself. And I don't understand and I don't agree. And then we move into chapter 10, which is like all about the laws and I'm here for that, right? Like that's totally my jam. I love reading about laws and case law and that kind of stuff. Like, yeah. So I'm so confused how to feel about this book.
Yeah, it is an interesting read, that is for sure. And especially we've already picked our next book club book, which is Normal Sucks by Jonathan Mooney. And so it's so interesting because our next author is a dyslexic neurodivergent author, and then we're reading this book that claims dyslexia doesn't even exist, and even if it does, it doesn't matter, it's all good. And so, which of course neither of us endorse or believe or any of the above. And so yeah, I'm like, all right, I'm glad we're reading it because I'm always up for knowledge. I mean, I'd read a cereal box if you put it in front of me and find it interesting, even if I don't agree with it. But yeah, there's definitely some sections in here that I'm like, oh, okay, then. So I feel like you have more notes on section or on chapter 9 than I do. You
I think
took a
so.
little
And
bit more meat out of that.
yeah. And I think a lot of that's going to have to do with our very different styles and approaches to homeschooling and education in general, right? So I think it'll be an interesting discussion, even if there wasn't a ton of great value from the book.
Yeah, I like it.
We'll start for me on page 145. The quote says, among all the young people I talked to, there was never anywhere a hopeful, positive, enthusiastic response to what I said. I'm going to make a side note and say, I think that's probably because of what a condescending jerk you were. His quote continues with, I cannot remember even one among all those students, blah, 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 because he likes to be verbose about things that don't matter, who said or later wrote to me, Mr. Holt, here's what I am interested in and care about. How can I find a way to work at it? And I was like, seriously? Like, you never met a single high schooler in public school who went on to do something in a field that they cared about. Like, I have two relatives. One just graduated from college. She got her degree in science. I won't go into details, right? Because you don't need to track her down, but she cares a lot about climate change and animals, and that's what she got her degree in, and that's what she did her internships in. And she's constantly her social media feeds are full of these, things about caring about the climate and taking care of climate change and all this. And she's working in it. Like she's passionate about it and she's doing it. And a kid, I'm trying to think of the right way to describe him. He's not a kid, a young man, I guess, who's just graduated high school and he really wants to fly helicopters. And he's picked a university program that has a great helicopter. I didn't even know that was a thing, but there's a helicopter school, training, something there, and we are not super special, unique people. You cannot tell me that we're the only ones out there who were excited to go study the things that we went and studied and wanted to work in the thing. Come on.
Yeah. It definitely does seem, and I think maybe that's part of the reason why you have more notes for this section than I do, is because when I read through it, So my best friend always says, like, if we're having a conversation and somebody that I'm not particularly excited to talk about comes up, there is no hiding it on my face, right? Like, if my words don't say it, my face is absolutely going to say it. And so I think I kind of applied that to this section of reading where I was just like, this is stupid. I don't know why he's talking about this. And so you actually like went into it and was like, it kind of dug in and said, oh, that wouldn't be rational, or that wouldn't be accurate. And I was just like, next page, where I was like, stop talking, please stop talking. Not my favorite
Yeah.
thing you've ever said. So I think that's part of the reason. I mean, I have very little highlighting in this whole section, and normally I'm quite the scribbler, but yeah, I think I just didn't even take the time to analyze it I do completely agree with what you just said, but I
Yeah.
don't think I even took the time to analyze it to that degree, because I was just like, next.
Well, I'm kind of relieved, right? Because when I do my book club reading, I actually go through and I use like post-it notes where things catch my mind, and I sometimes will write on the post-it note. I have a real problem. I can't actually write in books. It's a thing I have. But so I put post-it notes, and I sometimes write notes, and then afterwards I go back and I type up my notes like based on the post-it notes and what my thoughts were at the time. And so when I went back through earlier today to type up my notes for this discussion, I was like, oh man, I only have like 6 post-it notes for these 2 chapters. Whereas like normally I have like 10 for each chapter. Like I hope I have enough, like I feel like there was a lot that I just kind of glossed over as well. So I think we've got each other covered, because you talked about some things that I didn't later on. So I think we'll be okay.
Exactly. But I totally see your point on that, by the way. Yes. I mean, you see news stories all the time about amazing teens doing amazing things. And yeah, so that doesn't seem to make a ton of sense to me either. It's not something. Interests and passion and creativity are not exclusive to homeschoolers. I mean, you might
Mhm.
find more of it in the homeschool community because they have more opportunity, but it's not an exclusivity thing.
Yeah, or even more experience in it before they went to college.
Hmm.
But yeah, like that, just don't tell me that you never once saw that. Come on. It's like a bad debate strategy my kid would use, that I'd be like, "You're gonna get crushed. Like, no one's gonna believe you." Right?
Well, it's interesting because I was thinking just now, so in our book club that we were both members of that we met through, we read Raising Critical Thinkers by Julie Bogart. And one of the things, so she talks a lot in that book about how to analyze a source to see if it's a valid source, which is so important in today's society. I mean, we have
Mhm.
people, I saw a thing the other day where somebody was saying that Jim Carrey is playing Joe Biden and he's a body double. I mean, it's like, and so I'm sitting there thinking, like, now more than ever, we really need somebody to sit back and be like, that doesn't seem like valid information. Perhaps I should fact check that before I spew it to someone else, right? But one of the things, so in the book, Julie Bogart gives us tips as far as how to validate a source. And it talks about like only citing yourself or only citing your organization as opposed to citing a broad variety of sources and things like that. But some of the things that were in there were using like never language, right? Using this really painting it with a huge brushstroke. Just it's a one size fits all. It's always this way. It's never this way. Using language like that should be an indicator to us that something is amiss, because it's in almost everything in life there are exceptions. So if we're validating a source, that's usually kind of one way to do it.
Yes, no, absolutely. And so I will say that most of my comments for this chapter are along those lines. So on page 147, he's talking about working for free. And maybe he's going to go somewhere and work because it's a place he really wants to work. And he tells him, if you can give me a room, a roof over my head, and maybe some food, I can go for a while without pay. And like he really idealizes this. And I'm reading it and I'm thinking, like, I mean, hello, privilege, right? Like, how many people can be like, oh, I have no other things that I have to pay, and I'm not responsible for anything or any bills. And I have enough money to cover the things that I do, and I don't need to worry about health insurance. I have no health problems. Like just kind of all of these things. Like, come on, like, so he's totally idealizing it. But then, like, in the next breath, almost, he he totally turns and it's the other way. But I'm like, first off, so he's like, okay, so I'll work for no pay, maybe a little bit of food. And first off, if we're going to be a progressive podcast, we have to acknowledge the fact that, like, we all know unpaid internships help the wealthy and they hurt everyone else, right? Like, unpaid internships are not good. We should not support companies that do them. Like,
Mhm.
it's exploitation and it hurts the people who most need the experience. And I mean, like, and this is basically what he's idealizing. And now, granted, again, this is probably one of those things, like, he was doing this in what, probably the 40s and 50s, based on the way he's talking about it and writing about it, the age he was. So, like,
Right.
the 1940s and 1950s, things were very different, and we have a very different understanding of things. So, okay, fine, whatever. But
It didn't
he,
age well,
like,
though, to your point.
yeah. And so he goes on about this, right? And he even says for himself about how he changes career paths, and, he did this, and then, when he decided he wanted to grow food, he went to this school, and then when he decided he wanted to do something else, he went here. But then you get to page 149 in the section called False Starts, and he's talking about himself personally changing career paths. But then he seems to say that it's bad if you went to college or university and you changed career paths. And literally, he has a quote, but it still seems too bad to have spent 15 years of his life and $40,000 of his parents' money just to find out he didn't want to be an English professor. I'm like, I am positive that you weren't on that farm growing food for 15 years. Like, you didn't invest 15 years as an English professor and then be like, you know what? Like, I accumulated this knowledge. I enjoyed learning about it. I taught for a while, but, like, it's just not doing what I thought it was going to do. And I'm going to do something else. Like, why is it that it's bad for your friend because he got a college degree and did it, but it's, like, fine for you because you also got a degree and you went, like, this other route? Like, hello, hypocrisy. Like, I don't understand. Like, I don't understand.
I know. And I will add, okay, because we come on starting last week, this book really just went downhill, right? If you were reading this book, not for book club for the podcast, would you still be reading it?
No. No. I mean, and the thing is then I would be sad that I missed chapter 10, right?
Yeah,
Because I did
you
actually
liked that one.
really enjoy chapter 10, but I would have stopped. I would have thrown the book across the wall at the last chapter, and actually I probably wouldn't have even made it to the last chapter. I'm going to be honest. I would not have made it this far.
Yeah, and I'm not a I really do not give up on books easily. I think I have book FOMO because I'm like, but what if it's epic at the end, right? And I read this book not that long ago. I think so my pleasure reading, if you will. This is a terrible genre to say you take pleasure in, but if I'm free reading, let's say, I'm a World War II historical fiction junkie, right? Specifically stuff that's set in Europe. And a million of these books have been written about libraries and the destruction of books during that time. So I can't remember exactly which one it was. But there was this one book that I was reading, and the whole way through, it was just kind of a like slugfest for me. Like I was like, "Wah." And then my favorite part of the book was at the end. So I
Mhm.
already had difficulty setting aside a book that I didn't like. And my mom had this friend, Rita, who she played tennis with for years, and she was an avid reader. And Rita always had this thing that was like, life's too short to read a book you don't like. If I don't like a book, I'm done. I move on to something else. And I'm like, I try to channel my inner Rita and I just can't do it. Like, I can't give up on a book. And so part of me is like, would I still be reading this book if it wasn't for book club? But I swear to you, I've read the next book and it's really good. Our next book club book is really, really good. So I swear, and I can't promise you Amanda's going to like it. She hasn't read the next book. Only I have. It was my recommendation. I can't promise you she's going to like it. She may still be like, this is the worst. This is the second worst book ever. Second only to John Holt book. But I promise the next one I thought was valid. But this book is not my favorite. And I might give it up if I wasn't reading it for book club, but I still think it's valid to kind of share these thoughts because to your point in our last book club section, John Holt is seen as like the father figure of homeschool, and people are devouring his content. And I'm reading it going, huh? Maybe it's just this John Holt book. Maybe the other ones are better. I don't know. But that's why we picked this one for this, was because we keep hearing like John Holt, John Holt. We were like, okay, great. Let's pick that for our inaugural book club book. And I'm like, yeah, no. So I do feel bad in a sense that our very first book is such a dud. And then people are going to tune in and be like, man, all they do is trash this book. But I promise we do like other books. It's just this
Yeah.
one. It's a rough read.
It is. I mean, it's I will say if it wasn't for book club, I probably wouldn't keep reading it. But I am glad that I'm reading it, right? Because like we've said a few times, this comes up a lot, right? If you're in any homeschool groups, this book gets brought up, and I don't like not having a good reference point for whatever people are talking about. And
Mhm.
now I have a very educated reference point. Now, may
Exactly.
or may not be a good thing for my Facebook groups, but
This is my my thing, like, um to be able to then respond to those comments and be like, meh, can I suggest like three other titles, you know? And it's kind of like one of these things where it's maybe just been a staple in the homeschool world for so long that it just keeps getting recommended all the time. I feel like in the world of homeschooling and in just historical fiction in general, like The Boy in the Striped Pajamas is that book, right? Where it's like it's been denounced by like every Holocaust organization. And yet every time somebody's like, I need something for my middle schooler to introduce, you know, World War II, and people are like, The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. And it's like, no, right? And because it's outdated and it has fallacies and it has this and it has that and, you know, all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, this is that thing now where it's like whenever I see it recommended, I'm going to be like, yeah, I don't know about that, right? There are other books out there that I would recommend to give you a really strong, solid foundation of homeschooling that's not this one.
yeah. Well, and eventually at some point in our regular podcast, we will have to do that, right? That'll have to be our recommended resources, like our top three.
Yes.
Like, if you want a foundation, instead of going with John Holt, recommend these.
Yeah, exactly. Because dyslexia is a real thing and it does exist. Sorry, John Holt.
Yeah.
Yeah, they added dyslexic thinking to LinkedIn as a skill set. Richard Branson was one of the big people that pushed forward and all this kind of stuff. And I feel like John Holt is rolling over in his grave with all these people
I hope
checking the
so.
box saying
I
dyslexic
hope
thinking.
so. I hope he's so dizzy in there.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Oh my
So,
goodness. Well, our next one aligns, Amanda.
oh yeah, it does. All right. Do we have the same? I bet we have different thoughts on it though. Because
Probably
this,
you go first, and
yeah.
then I'll
So,
I'll figure it out.
so page 154. Um, so I mean, he's just really bashing university. Um, he's really anti-university in this section, generally speaking, which there's some irony there, but that's a whole other story. Um, so the thing is, I'm going to be honest. I'm generally pretty pro college or university. And I have no issue with trade schools or technical jobs. There are people that's absolutely definitely more their route and that's the route they want to go. And honestly, I would be thrilled if my child trained in a trade or something like that before going on to university so that he's got a solid way to make money while he's learning and exploring other things. To me, I feel like university really does open up an entirely new world to young people. It allows them to think and explore and just really go beyond what they knew and what their parents taught them, the core beliefs that you grew up with in your own house, and it gives you a chance to explore, yeah, do I actually believe those things? Do I believe something different? Do I, where do I come down on? But they get to do it in this like safety net environment, right? Like you have these years to go and do this, and yes, you have to pay for it, but frankly, I'd rather they have those years with that safety net than, trying to do it in the real world and failing and ending up in, some kind of other crazy debt that requires they file for bankruptcy to get out of it, or, like whatever other kinds of things that you see sometimes happen with kids who go that route. So I really don't have the problem with university that he does. And I think it's important that a large number of young adults experience that kind of awakening and learning how to really evaluate, again, outside of your family's home and your family's beliefs so that you know where you come down on things. I feel like it's really important for a healthy society.
Hmm. So I am not I'm neutral on college, right? I
Yeah.
think it's awesome for some people.
Mhm.
And to your point, I think it's not for other people. The problem that I have is that we were all sold this like it's the one and only path to success is college,
Mm,
right? And so we have so many people like the college debt crisis, especially in America. Anybody who's listening abroad wouldn't necessarily potentially understand, but at 17, kids sign loans for $100,000+ that they have no concept of what they're signing. They have
mm,
no idea what they want to do with their lives. The interest on them is literally like mafia criminal levels of interest.
yeah.
They will be paying them until they die. Some of these people are going to school to become a teacher. They're not going to make that money the best day they ever live to pay off these loans, right?
Yeah.
Or other professions that are sadly very low paying professions. So I feel like I feel sad for the people that were sold this dream route through college. Like this is the path to success. So that part upsets me, right? And there are ways to get a college degree without going into mountains of debt, right? There's companies with tuition reimbursement. You can go the community college route and then transfer to a 4 year. So you can do college without debt. It's not to say that you can't, but a lot of kids don't even realize that. They're just sold on this like 4 year university is the path to success. Um, and I think there is a path to success that doesn't exist that doesn't require going through college to have happen. However, I feel like yes, you can get certain skills and be adequately prepared for certain roles in society or in organizations, corporations, etc. But I feel like it's all a very idealistic view of what that potential looks like because our society is still very much trained on that 4 year degree.
Mhm.
And so even though it's realistic and it's possible and it's like okay, all these things, you look at these job boards. I mean, I'm in a couple of Facebook groups for homeschool moms who work or just work from home moms and stuff like that. And they'll post these things. It's like a $15 an hour job and they want like graduate work for it. And
Mhm.
it's just ridiculous. And so these companies are still so hooked on having that piece of paper. And so I think no matter how much we can rationalize it and say there's other ways to get skills or there's other paths to success, if society doesn't kind of catch up to that thought process, it's all kind of just a moot point. It doesn't really make any sense if you're still going to get when resumes are all coming in through HR and it's like degree pile on the left, no degree pile on the right, degree pile on the left. And
And that's
so
it. And people aren't real people aren't even seeing the resumes until they
mm,
make it through the software that filters. There's
mhm,
there. I mean, it used to be software. Now it's probably AI
bots,
filtering.
yeah.
And yeah, and it's looking for the keywords. And if you don't have where you went to university, you're not even going to make it in front of real eyes.
Mhm. And
So,
it's a shame because you might have 30 years experience in the
mhm.
field and be able to run circles around the kids who went to university who don't maybe have life experience or practical application, but in some ways that conditioning that degree needs to be there. And so, I mean, all my kids are kind of either doing college coursework and we're unschoolers, but I feel like there's a way to blend unschooling, interest-led learning, and still higher education in preparation for those next steps. And if they wanted to do trade school would be fine, right? But there needs to be, unfortunately, I feel like some kind of like degree certification. There's got to be a credential there because unfortunately nobody's really accepting on the job experience as validation for you deserve an interview, which is sad, but it's kind of the reality, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, I've so I think for me this hits home especially, right? Because I the first person in my family to get a 4-year degree, and it completely changed my life, right? I grew up in very rural conservative Iowa, and I went to university in Chicago. And even though I went to a private Catholic university, actually, I wasn't Catholic, but that was where I landed. Um, I mean, I learned so much. And it was the beginning of really seeing a completely different side of the world and
Hmm.
opening my world perspective. I suppose the conservatives are right. right? I went to college a Republican and I left a Democrat.
It's dangerous.
I know it totally works. They brainwashed me. Um, but it's those kinds of things, like just things that I would not have ever known or been exposed to or had the chance to really think about without being in that environment and being able to safely explore what that looked like and what that meant for me. And then also, from a personal perspective, I grew up watching my dad, and he's an arson investigator. He started out as a police officer, so he has an associate's degree because that's what was required in criminal justice or something like that. And once he had a family and there were more kids and there were some situations at work, right? My mom was kind of like, I think it's maybe time to look at something else. And so he moved over into fire, being a firefighter, and then he became an arson investigator. And he's very well respected. And he has all of these international associations and certifications and all of these kinds of things. But later in his career, he had a really hard time looking to move to other companies or to do other things because they all required a 4-year degree. And it didn't matter how many years of experience and the fact that he
Mm-hmm.
taught at state fire schools, and he was an instructor, but he didn't have a 4-year degree. And so, I mean, it was that just so hard to get his foot in the door and, and not having the same negotiating and leverage when it got to those points. Like, and it's that thing, it's the reality, and I worry about that from like a trade job just because of what I saw personally growing up from a very working class family. Trade jobs are physically demanding, and at some point your body can't keep doing that. And are
Mm-hmm.
you able to move into the management position when your body is tired? Will they let you because you were there long enough, or do they say, we love you, you're great, but we got to have that 4-year degree, and are you going to go back to school at 40 to get your 4-year degree so that you can say, look, I got my business degree, let me be the manager now. Like, yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's difficult.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
One of the problems that we've had approaching college is that because my kids have been free to go as deep as they want to in anything that they've desired, we went to a portfolio review session at FIT, the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York, which is one of the top fashion schools in the world, even though it's a community college, which is really cool. It's not a, mega bucks university. And so while we were there, the kids went off. They're late high schoolers, went off to do the portfolio review with the professors for the various departments. And I stayed in the admissions meeting that the parents stayed in. And there were people in the room who I felt terrible for. Like, one mom raised her hand and said, okay, it's portfolio and an essay to get into FIT. She said, how does my kid build a portfolio? There's no art in school anymore. My kid's really interested in fashion, but how is she? And the parents didn't have money for extra classes and things like that. And I'm like, I completely get that. Now, on the flip side, my kid has had this world of opportunities presented to her, the ability to go to conferences and the ability to explore this and take class. And because she's homeschooled and she has her own schedule, she's regularly attending webinars that are being presented at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, and she's part of all these guilds and doing all these things. My kid left thinking, I'm a little confused about what I would do here, because these are kids coming in from gen ed art classes, and I am already, on the 10th floor of this program, and they're on the ground floor. And so we went around and around about what to do. And finally she was like, I just kind of want to go to college though. Like, I kind of want to live in a dorm and swipe my card in the food hall and have that. And I was like, then go. I mean, FIT is not expensive as colleges go. It wouldn't cost her a lot of money. She'd probably be able to get some scholarships through some of the guilds, the artist guild she's a member of. And so I'm like, if you just want to go have a college experience and explore a topic that you find interesting, go and have the best time ever, right? And so it's so silly because she'd leave with the piece of paper and she'd be qualified to do the things, but she was qualified when she got there, right?
Yeah.
So it's such a weird dynamic. And really, she's been looking at master's programs and PhD programs, and really what she wants are the PhD level programs where you can dig into the things that you want to do and go as deep as you want in research. And she's frustrated that you have to go through the bachelor's process to get there. She's like, I'm already at the point where I want to have a thesis topic and go deep. So it's pretty
Yeah.
interesting. There are unschooling colleges. There was one in Canada that I was really excited about that's like that, where you can design your own coursework and dig in. And there's another one in New England, but they're so expensive.
Mm.
I'm like, I don't know if I'm willing to pay that much money for you to just go explore your own topics. I'm like, you're doing that now for free, girlfriend. So, but I get the piece of paper is important in society. I get it,
Yeah, it is. But the other advantage of homeschooling is that if you choose to go that route, and if you're doing all of these things we're talking about, you can, for most, some universities don't accept the transfer credits, but most of the universities will accept a quite large number of gen ed transfer credits.
Mhm.
So whatever school you're going to, if that matters to you, right, you can go in at the point where you're getting to do more of the focused things that you're
Mhm.
actually interested in. You don't have to just automatically go in as a freshman taking all the regular freshman classes, because you have that flexibility, especially as homeschoolers, to do a lot more of the dual enrollment and concurrent enrollment type classes and things like that. So, I mean, at
Mhm.
least there's that balance.
And save a boatload of money in the process.
Yes.
Right. Also
Yes.
important.
Yeah.
I have three
Of
kids
course,
that
my kids' goal schools don't accept any transfer credits, right? Like you got to
nothing.
start from the beginning.
All three of mine, if they were to go to college on the 18 to 22-year-old time frame, right? The typical time frame. I mean, they're all out of whack because they all started early and they're doing their own thing. But if they were on that typical time frame of like graduate and go to college, all three of them would be in college at the same time. So for years I've been like, scholarships are your friend, right? Because prepaid college plans are your friend, because it was poor
Yeah.
planning on our part, right? I thought college was going to be the worst of it, and then we went through the orthodontia phase all at the same time, and I was like, okay, this is pretty bad. This is gearing me up for college. But like, who decided to have all these kids so close together?
Right. I should really sit down and have a talk with them.
Exactly. All right,
Oh.
dare we move on to the thing that caused Amanda to send me a WTF in our text thread? Talk to me about
Oh,
leaf gathering, Amanda. You seem really passionate about it.
leaf gathering. I'm so passionate about gathering leaves. Okay, so there's this whole section on page 163 and around it where he's gone to a public garden to collect leaves to feed
Sorry, I
his
can't stop
worms.
laughing.
Right? The whole thing is ridiculous. Okay, so he's gone to a public garden to collect leaves in barrels, and he takes them home to feed his worms. And when he's at the public garden, he finds these four boys who are ages 8 to 10, and they're playing at the public garden. They've been allowed to come to the garden alone as a group, but they've been told not to leave the garden. And the boys are really curious about what he's doing, and they want to help gather the leaves. And the story evolves to the point where he's like, you can come with me back to my house to see how this, where I'm dumping the leaves and how it works. And they're like, oh, we
Wait,
can't leave the.
hold on. It's not even house, because I didn't highlight anything here because you already told me this was a shit show. But on page 162, it's not even a house. It's his little sunken patio behind his basement apartment. Like, if that doesn't scream Dateline special, I don't know what does. Okay.
Right?
Right.
No,
Okay.
yeah.
Sorry.
So,
Continue.
okay. Yeah. So he convinces them that it's okay. It's okay to leave the public garden to go with him a couple blocks over to where he's staying in a basement apartment. They go over, and then the story goes on to the point where he brings him into his home. I'm just like, this is my freaking nightmare. Like, I mean, I would hope that my kid would be like, no, like hard no. I don't know who you are. I don't know what is going on. Like, I don't care about worms that much. But like, what? Why? How did this stay in the book, like when they went through editing in 2020, how was someone not like, whoa, hold up, we should remove this section, like this sounds all sorts of sketch, like I don't.
It was bad, right? So we have a little park that's down the street from our house. Right. And my youngest, who's 12, this was a year ago. So he would have been 11 at the time. Oh, he just took his earbuds off to hear the story. He goes down to the park and he rides his bike down there by himself. He's fine. And he calls me one day and he's like, there's a car in the parking lot that the person doesn't have a kid. Like it's weird. Like the whole thing, his feelers were going off, his antenna were up. He was like, there's something weird here, right? And so he called me and I was like, no problem. I mean, it is literally down the block from my house. Before he could even get the sentence out, I was up, I was out the door in the car. I said, just stay on the phone with me. I'll be right there, But I'm like, this kid is always aware of his surroundings. His feelers go up for anything that's weird or anything like that. So hang on, Liam, if you ran into some guy at the park who was collecting leaves for his worms and he was like, hey, come, he's already laughing. And he says, like, come back to my house with me and you can help me with the leaves and the worms. Would you go with him? He's like, no. I mean, I have told my kid, all my kids, anybody ever lays a hand on you, you scream like you are being murdered, right? Like, I'm like, you bite, you kick, you scream, like all of the above. And these kids are like, worms? I'm in, right?
Oh, okay. You said I won't care. Okay.
Exactly. That's not at all what a pedophile would say. Sure, I'll come.
Right.
Like, I'm a free range parent, and like my kids are smart enough to know this is a stupid thing to do, right? This is not a good plan. We're not going to do this. We're not going with the crazy worm guy.
This is not a good plan. I like that. This is not a good plan.
Okay. You want to move on to your safe space in chapter 10 then?
Oh. Yeah, I mean, so then we move on to chapter 10. And chapter 10 is actually like all about the different lawsuits. And he does spend a long time talking about testifying in Minnesota on something or whatever. But I really enjoyed chapter 10. I love law and I love politics and those kinds of things. And I read a lot of that. Yeah, I love that. I read a lot of that for fun in between reading smut books, but that's a whole other story. And so yeah, chapter 10 was totally my jam. And the only note that I took from the whole chapter, the only thing that I put a sticky on was on page 170 at the very top. He says, contrary to popular myth, there have never been statutes forbidding homeschooling anywhere in the United States. And I think that's really important because there is a lot of fear mongering about how they're going to take homeschooling away. They're going to crack down on homeschooling. They're not going to allow it. And the book really outlines how, like, as early as 1924 or something like that, like this idea of parents being allowed to home educate their children is allowed and supported. And, this can happen. And yes, different places have different rules around what that looks like or, how they enforce it. But there has never actually been statutes forbidding homeschooling in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I liked this chapter. I'm a history nerd, and this is history, right? It's the history of homeschooling, basically. So I liked this chapter. I did think it would be interesting because we would have, I just when reading knew we would have varying viewpoints on page 169, where he talks about this vision of how schools and homeschoolers can work together for society's good and how different groups can work together, even though they may have different visions about education and so on. So you and I have different visions about education and I'm cool with you, but you can't hold any power over me, right? So
Yeah.
when it comes to the school system, I am the opposite, right? So you're hooked in with a charter school and that's working great for your family and your kiddo. And I'm like, that's awesome. I'm super happy for you. And I am thinking, stay the hell away from me. I don't want you telling me what to do. I don't want you knowing what I'm doing day to day. I'm good. Whatever I'm doing is working. My kids are happy. They're progressing, all of the above. I have if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile thought process when it comes to the school system. And so I am like, no, thank you. Stay away from me. Right.
Yeah.
So, I am kind of in that thing. When we lived in North Carolina, so homeschooling there is governed by the North Carolina Department of Non-Public Education. And you open your homeschool once, and then you have to annually test your kids. You don't have to submit the test to anybody, you just have to do the test. So it's kind of stupid. And you're supposed to keep an attendance book. If I remember, that was 2 states ago, but if I remember correctly, that was all we had to do there. And in the spring, they would randomly select homeschoolers and they would send out these invitation letters for an optional meet and greet at the public library where you could come and bring your portfolio or your record, whatever, and just chat about homeschooling, right? And I got one the last year that we lived there, and I was like, and we're shredding that, right? But then there were, because I was like, no, we're not opening a line of questions at all. We're just not doing it. But then there were other homeschoolers who were like, we have a lot of freedom. Let's play nice to keep our freedom, right? If we're always resistant, then they'll think we're hiding something. And so they would show up and they would go. But every year when those letters would come out, all the Facebook groups in North Carolina would be like, I got this letter. And I'm like, and all the comments were like, it says it's optional. Like, go, don't go. It doesn't matter. It's optional, you know? But yeah, I was not one of the optional attendees.
Yeah.
So we do differ a little bit on our willingness to interact with the governing bodies of homeschooling.
Yeah, but I would say the flip side of that is we interact with the school because it's working for us, right? Like I just last night was having a conversation with my husband about the fact that we probably won't stay in a public school charter for homeschooling in the California system, even for high school, because once you get to high school in the California public school system where you're homeschooling, there are different rules. And so, kind of like one of the arbitrary rules, in my opinion, is that if your seventh grader takes algebra, you cannot count algebra as a high school credit because they took it before ninth grade. And so, even though they're homeschooling, they have to, keep progressing. And then that potentially puts them at a really high level of math in high school, which they're not going to get from their school, even if they're at a charter school, right? Like I'm going to have to go to a college to get that for him so that he stays on track. And like the whole thing, it's just like it's silly to me. Like at this point, like if he's that far ahead, like why would I continue to keep trying to shove him into this public school, formula that they have? For right now, it doesn't matter. They don't care. They could that's not even true, actually. They love the fact that when he sits down and we just did fourth grade testing and he tested out of sixth grade on basically everything. And of course, they love that, right? Because that looks great for them, right? Like, oh, look at our scores. Look how well we do. We've got, and it helps them get better scores and rankings and whatever, right? So they leave us alone for the most part because he's doing well and he does well, and they don't care as far as they're concerned. He's on the books as a fourth grader. He's doing fourth grade work, and we turn in the random worksheet that shows whatever he's doing. And every once in a while, she'll be like, can you just print something off from the fourth grade level of, this? And I'm like, all right, dude, here, just like fill out this worksheet, like less than 5 minutes, but I got to submit it, and
Check the box.
like, it's not like just, it's no big deal. But at some point, it's not going to work for us anymore. And that's also okay, right? Like,
yeah,
just because you went one route for a little while doesn't mean that you have to stay that route forever. And what that
you're
looks
married
like,
to it.
yeah, you get to change, whether it's changing curriculum, whether it's changing how you're doing it, if you're being an academic unschooler and then you decide to do true unschooling, and then you do unschooling for a little while and you're like, actually, you know what, this isn't working, we're going to try this other thing. You get to change, you get to do whatever actually works for you. That's the beauty of homeschooling.
Flexibility and freedom. I love it. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely.
So it's interesting because what you said ties into my next note that I had taken, which was on page 173, where you were saying like they love your kiddo because he's making them look great, right? So there
Yep.
was a thing on page 173, which I thought was really interesting, where it said, if you learn, the schools get the credit. If you don't, the student gets the blame. And I thought, how true
Absolutely.
is that? Right? How
Yep.
many parents have said down the kid's not applying themselves, they're not paying enough attention, they're not being diligent enough, they're not putting enough effort in, right? It's never, maybe we're not teaching the way this kid learns or anything like that, right? But
Yeah.
they're all, I know the town that we lived in, when we lived in Florida, the schools had like the big digital signs outside, right? And it was like A+ school because of our test scores, right? So they're celebrating their successes, but anybody who's not along for that success, it's not them, it's the student, right? And
Yep.
so I thought, man, okay, I really think that's a brilliant observation there. Like, that cannot be true. It can't be true that every student who's not doing well didn't try hard enough, didn't apply themselves. It's just not possible, right? It's like before when we were saying anytime it's a huge broad brushstroke of like never happens or it's all students who fail, then no, that's probably not the case, right? There's undiagnosed neurodivergence, which John Holt wouldn't say because he doesn't believe in that. Or there's, difficulty at home, or that's not how the student learns, or there's other factors at play. But as long as it's never the fault of the school system, we're good. The
Yep.
school system can do no wrong.
Mhm.
So that definitely reminded me of that. On a lighter note, there's a thing on page 175 where it says that a student and her parents sued a college with a Hearst Pierpoint College for loss of earnings, damage to her career prospects, and personal distress due to poor teaching by her Latin instructor. And I would like to know if there's a statute of limitations on being able to sue your Latin instructor, because I still have trauma. Like 1996, Miss O'Rourke, who has since passed away, and we're not supposed to speak ill of the dead, but that woman was the meanest, the absolute meanest woman. I knew no Latin. I never had any clue what was going on, and all I did was get yelled at in that class. So is there something I can do all these years later, or is that a done deal? I'm not really sure.
I think the problem was with the student.
It had to have been. Definitely not the school, definitely not the teacher.
No, the problem was with the student. Everyone else was fine.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Like I can visualize the classroom to this day. It was that bad. Like I remember where I sat, the whole thing. The whole thing. It was all terrible. People, and I see in homeschool groups, people are like, we're going to study Latin. And I'm like, don't do that to your child. Right? Like, please don't make them. It was the worst experience ever. So yeah, there we go. And then the only other thing that I wrote down in this section, oh, that's not true. I had two things. And also on 175, there were a couple of things in here about like how the schools basically said that they can't guarantee a high level of instruction. They can't guarantee that they know best how to teach a child. That's not in their purview. They can't make you those promises. But then at the same time, the school system, like, how many posts do you see in Facebook groups where people are like, I went in to withdraw my kid, and the school like browbeats the parents and just puts them down and makes them feel like crap, and you're going to ruin your kid's life, and you're not qualified, and their kid's going to be stupid, and like all this stuff. And his point here is like, they're saying they can't tell you that they know exactly what to do, but they're definitely positive that you're not qualified to do it, which I loved. So I was like, there are so many people who feel insecure or things like that. And they're being told by their parents, the grandparents of the kids, by society, by the school, by teacher, this is a terrible idea. You're never going to be successful at this. And so I really liked that point. I kind of have less now that I've been homeschooling for so long, but in the earlier days, kind of had like these set things that I would question myself on to do like a little logic check. And I was just talking to a homeschool friend not that long ago. We were talking about transcripts. And she was like, I'm just so worried that I'm going to drop the ball and they're not going to be ready and this, that, and the other thing. And she lives in a state that's out of the 50 states is like 45th in education or something like that. Right. And so I was like, do you really mean to tell me that you think you're going to do a worse job than the 45th ranked state is going to do it. I'm like, you've got this, right? Like the bar is set pretty low. So I guarantee you're going to do a better job than what is happening in the school system near your house, mainly just because she lives in a state with really poor educational results also. But I'm like, you've got this. Like, and so I feel like that's another one of those things that would be like one of those like self-assurance mantras to me. Like, they don't know it either. It's all good. They don't know. I mean, I went to my one and only IEP meeting in the public school system and sat there with this table full of experts and was like, so they present all their evidence. Okay, so what are we going to do? They didn't know what to do. They all sat there staring at each other. And I'm like, you all have like master's degree and doctorates and all, and you're telling me you don't know what to do with we're done here. I'll take
Yeah.
over. Thank you very much.
Oh, I know. I went to an IEP meeting. We had one, and I was like, according to this thing from, blah, blah, blah with published by Woodcock Johnson, the test maker, like it's supposed to be
Yeah.
handled this way and you're supposed to use this score and this score. And they were like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I was like, you mean from service bulletin number 3 about how to effectively use the test that they put out? They're like, I've never seen that. I'm like, I mean, now granted, we've established that I like to
You like your
study and
research. Yeah.
research and learn, but like I don't get paid to do this. And I found service bulletin number 3 on how to use it to identify disabilities, learning disabilities. Like I think maybe you
Feel like
probably
that should be within your wheelhouse.
right.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
true story.
That meeting, I was already leaning towards homeschooling, and that meeting was the nail in the coffin. We were done after that. I was like, okay, and we're done here, So yeah, so that's like another one of my kind of things that I think I'd add to my tool belts when I'm talking to parents who feel insecure about their ability to homeschool, and be like, they're just throwing darts at the wall too. Like they don't, they've taken some classes and stuff, of course, which maybe you haven't, but at the end of the day, every kid is different. There's no manual for how to educate each individual child, and nobody's going to know your kid better than you are. They're not. So
That's it.
and nobody's
Individualized, differentiated learning is the most important thing to successful learning.
Mhm.
And there is no teacher in a classroom of 20 plus kids who has the time to create an individualized, differentiated learning, personalized plan for each student in that classroom. And if
No.
you have the bandwidth to do it, as long as you're not, 19 and counting, you have more time and you can do that and you can do a better job if you want.
Mhm.
Yeah.
All right, so you threw out a Duggar reference. Did you see that I have a Duggar note in my column over on the
No,
right?
I didn't. No.
I did. Okay. So page 186 and 187 talks about school as a safety net for abuse. And I remember when that was at the Turpins in California. You're in California. Is that their name? Do you know who I'm talking
I
about?
don't know that one. No.
Oh, it was this horrendous abuse case. And of course, they were quote unquote homeschoolers, which they weren't homeschooling their kids, but they were staying out of the public eye by being homeschoolers. Right.
Mhm.
And I remember seeing that and thinking, oh, this is not going to be good for the homeschool world. Right. But the other thing is, did you see the Amazon documentary? It was on Amazon Prime, The Shiny Happy People. Did you watch it?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. So I thought it was really interesting because on page 187, it talks about a person's ability to participate in democracy. And it says another concern about homeschooling is that it undermines democracy because homeschooled children will not learn the skills needed to participate in our democracy. Which, of course, is ridiculous. I mean, you're teaching civics, you're teaching history, you're teaching all these things. I mean, my kids are coming with me when I vote. Who hasn't played, what homeschooler hasn't played presidential debate bingo? I mean, that's the bingo sheets make the rounds in the homeschool groups all the time. And we sit and we play the bingo and we talk about all the stuff and all that. So I think obviously that's ridiculous. But one of the things that I found really interesting was there was a section, if you haven't watched Shiny Happy People, please do. It's equally informative and terrifying. And it's not specifically about the Duggars, but they are kind of a central focus. They're kind of the example family that proves a larger point.
Mhm.
But one of the things they talk about in there was this long game by the IBLP, which is the religious association that they're connected with, to seed the government in the future with these conservative belief systems and and it goes beyond conservative belief system. It is on another planet, right? And so I thought it's really interesting because not like I want to use that as a justification against John Holt, but these kids were in like civics groups where they were learning the law and they were learning all these things. And I don't recall the names of the people off the top of my head, but they brought up specific examples of people who are in government today who were members of these groups that were
Yeah.
sponsored by the IBLP, and these really, really extreme views. And these were homeschooled people. So clearly they were educated enough to participate in democracy, probably not the way many people would want them to participate in democracy, because their views are very drastic and very harmful to marginalized communities and things like that, and just civil
And
rights.
women, you know,
Yeah,
I mean,
women. That's well, we are, right?
yeah.
We're kind of, this episode will, go on forever. People will be listening to it ages, but we're recording this in the era of who would you rather be alone in the woods with, a man or a bear, right? The
Yeah.
big debate. If you're listening to this 3 years from now and you have no idea what we're talking about, Google it, right?
Yeah.
But the bears are winning, to give you an idea, right? So,
Mhm.
um, so I thought that was a really interesting viewpoint, because I'm like, for better or for worse, those homeschooled kids are participating in democracy.
Yeah, they are. I I guess I will say, um, I don't think that public school can be the only safety net for trying to prevent abuse, but I do think that it can be a safety net.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we were resource parents, which is what foster families are called in California, the state of California. You don't have foster parents here. You have resource families. Um, and so we definitely saw more things, right? And I don't think that public school was the answer in a lot of those situations. But at the same time, I do think that we definitely saw situations where public school was able to help catch things and get kids resources and services and help families get back on the right track um, when they needed it. And so I guess I'm a little torn on that. Again, that's one of those things from personal experience. I don't think it can be the only thing. And if you watch, back to your point, if you watch the Shiny Happy People documentary, you see the fact that this was, you know, bad things happen at church and in church groups, and those should also be mandatory reporters. I mean, like, your life should be full of mandatory reporters, and doesn't it doesn't always work. It does, so I mean, it's not that simple, it's complicated. But we, it's also, I mean, I do think that's one of those things. Is it enough of a reason to say everyone has to be in public school? No. Is there a grain of truth to the fact that it can help in certain situations? Like, yes. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, I do think that John Holt made a good point around that thing of, do you make the law to try to address the worst offenders, the people doing the worst? And that's not the way that we generally write laws, because it's kind of that thing. There'll be bad apples in whatever you're doing. There'll be people who break the rules. And does everyone lose that? I mean, in a public school classroom, probably, right? You see that all the
No
time.
more recess.
Yeah, no one gets this. No, the movie day's off for everyone because 3 of the kids were jerks. And
Yeah.
but that's not how a modern civilized advanced society works, and we don't want it to. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It's a tough one.
yeah.
Would you like some good news, though?
Yes.
Our next section of reading is the last one of the book.
Oh, yeah? I haven't even actually
Yes.
looked. How sad is that? I'm just going
Yeah.
along.
Yeah, our
Chapter by
next section of reading is the end because there's a huge appendix at the back. So it
Oh,
looks
yeah.
like we have a lot more,
Look
but
at that.
there's like 70 pages of almost 100 pages actually of appendix and notes and resources and uh,
You're
state
right.
references and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, our next section, chapter 11 and is it 12? Is that it? Let me see.
Oh, there it is. Yeah. So yeah,
11
it's
and
how to
12.
get started and school response.
Yeah. So that's it. We've got one more section and then we'll be leaving John Holt and I don't think we'll be picking another one of his books for book club.
Only if you get yourself a new co-host.
There you go. But our next book will be great. So if you are reading along with us, it's time to put your name on the wait list at the library for Normal Sucks by Jonathan Mooney, because that will be not the next book club episode, but the one after. I lead a book club group for middle schoolers. And so that's kind of my thing is like we have kind of a staged preparation. Like if you haven't sourced the book yet, now is the time, right? So I'm kind of conditioned to give everybody their countdown steps to get their next book.
Yep.
So yeah, well, all right. So the legal stuff was good. The leaf gathering, not so good. Mixed reviews of today's discussion, but we're getting through it. So we hope
Well,
you all enjoyed this week's segment of reading. I'm curious. We always say like, if you listen to us and you're thinking, yeah, this really resonates with me, that's a great sign that maybe you want to read the whole book. And I'm curious how many people want to read this book after listening to us talk about
yeah.
it.
And if you do, why?
Yeah,
Like
exactly. Let us know.
I'm genuinely curious, right? We've covered this in a number of different ways. I'm genuinely curious why. What is it that's like,
Yeah, no
yeah,
judgment, just
I'm
curious,
gonna get
right?
that. Yeah. Like what piqued your interest?
Exactly. Well, excellent. And listen, if you're not following us on Instagram, head on over, follow us on Instagram because we will be doing a giveaway of Normal Sucks by Jonathan Mooney. So if you want to read along with us, you certainly can. It is, and again, these episodes live on forever online, but it is currently May of 2024, and that giveaway will kick off shortly. So go ahead and give us a follow on Instagram, a like and follow on YouTube, a follow in Spotify, wherever you are. Follow us and like us so you don't miss any content. And plus, it makes our day.
Like me.
Exactly. It
Just
makes us really
like me.
happy. Exactly. So have an awesome rest of your day. Happy homeschooling, and we'll talk to you next week. Later,
Yeah.
Gators.
Have a good one.